We're John and Sarah Murphy. Our daughter Kaya will probably be, moving in and out of the frame. We are the owners of Music City Tiny House, which is, we like to think that it's Nashville's first.
Music City Tiny House is, I think twofold. It's a practical application for allowing people to actually walk through a tiny house that may not have had an opportunity to in the past. Sarah and I like to tell guests and people that come over and take a tour of the tiny house that the first tiny house we ever stepped foot in was our own, and that as a movement, we have to eliminate all, as many of the barriers of entry into the tiny house as possible. And one of those is to have an opportunity for people to walk around in one and stay in one and be able to envision in one and have a tangible representation of what a tiny house really is.
How did you get into the tiny house movement, or what made you decide to buy a tiny house? And I literally have no memory of that aha moment. What I can tell you was that I was pregnant with our daughter at the time, and I was freaking out at the lists of baby stuff that we were being told that we needed, and I literally just couldn't process it. I was like, humans have been having babies for thousands of years without wipe warmers and baby jumpers and bottles and all this other stuff that comes with having a baby. And I think right around that time I stumbled upon an article about this guy who challenged himself to live a year with no income, and it goes through like the things he found challenging, the things that he found easy, and it really just kind of clicked for me. I think slowly, as I was seeing tiny house pictures on Pinterest and like Facebook feeds with articles like this, and it was just kind of a slow progression where I was, like, wow, we have so much stuff and we spend money on so much crap that's not necessary for life. And then at that time, John had been working with the homeless community in DC for 5 years, and you want to talk about coming home and looking around and being like, wow, people that I work with don't have any of this, and I come home to our very middle income lifestyle. We had a condo, 1,200 square feet. We didn't have anything extravagant by any means, but even that feels extravagant when you're dealing with a population like that. So it didn't take very long for me to talk him into it, as someone who's always been the more frugal of the two of us, and a little bit more grounded, I think, with what's important in life. He was kind of like, okay, if that's what you want to do, I'm on board. I'll support you. What does this mean? Where do we start? Which was awesome, and I'm pretty sure not everybody has someone who's so supportive of their crazy hormonal pregnancy missions. But my nest, when I nested, was a dream of something that was a whole lot smaller than our house, and so that's how it got started. But then it became less about us living in a tiny house and more about the people that should be or could be living in a tiny house and why they're not living in a tiny house. And it really came down to what, as John said earlier, were those barriers of entry, the zoning, the building codes, the fact that nobody could envision themselves in one, because there's a whole lot of naysayers out there. Like we met every single one of them, I think, and it was all like, well, my closet's bigger than that. It's like, yeah, it is. You should try living in your closet. I bet you could. It's like you don't live in your closet because we've been told as a society that you shouldn't. That you should have 3,000 square feet. That you should have 2 cars parked in a garage with a yard, and I don't know, 6 figures in debt. That's okay. That's what society wants from you. And it was a slow kind of realization that wasn't okay with us anymore. I can't tell you how many times people were like, but it's student loans, it's a mortgage, that's good debt. And I was always like, oh, okay, well, cool. And then it was like, what is good debt actually? What does that mean? What is it good for? Who is it good for? Because it doesn't seem to be so good for us, because one of the first things that we talked about when we were trying to downsize was, well, we have all these obligations like student loans that we need to pay, and how are we going to afford that if we get a job that doesn't require us to work 50 to 60 hours? Like, what if we want to spend more time with our daughter? Well, that requires us to work a pretty hard down job, maybe take less money. Is that even possible? with the amount of debt and the payments that we have. So, you know, it's definitely like a step-by-step process, I think, but it's a whole different mindset, and it's been an amazing reset, I think, for both of us.
You know, tiny house as an opportunity of poverty alleviation, economic empowerment, that it certainly serves a role from a lot of stages in life, from, you know, students that are just graduating from college that are saddled with an enormous amount of student loan debt. You know, providing them an opportunity to actually own the space that they're living in and not just paying $1,500, $2,000, $2,800 a month in rent, where they're not getting anything back in equity. And you know, a tiny house is a tangible cost of living that they could theoretically sell after they have used it, to, you know, people that are in between jobs, or affordable housing, permanent supportive housing, a lot of opportunities for chronically homeless men and women, or for people that are in between jobs and need, you know, a livable space that's not quite as expensive. To retirees that you know, no longer need 2,500 or 3,000 square feet of livable space, that, you know, instead of living in a condo where, you know, if they, you know, can't tackle stairs or don't want to live in an HOA environment, you know, a tiny house is an opportunity for them to have their own space that's affordable for them to live in, and that's manageable, and completely customizable to really what they need in their life. You know, and it's not a settlement of debt that they have to take on. You know, even retirees or for people that are indigent that need to move into hospice care or a retirement community. You know, for an opportunity for, you know, if my parents needed to retire and, you know, had to have a space, they could absolutely live in a tiny house like this and in our house. I don't know how Sarah would feel about that, but it offers a lot more financial freedom for people that may or may not have that opportunity. So I think that at many phases of life, a tiny house can answer a lot of those questions.
Yeah, one of the things I love most about having become part of the tiny house movement is that you couldn't describe a typical tiny house enthusiast. You can't say they are in their early to mid-20s, single, or a couple. You couldn't say that they're retirees. You couldn't say that they're wealthy and can lay out $50,000 in order to build one, which is a critique that we often hear, that the tiny house movement's out of reach for the people that really need one. And that's not true at all. And that's one of the reasons why I love the tiny house movement, is because every demographic, every social status, every need, you know, that has a special situation or circumstance is touched by the idea of small living and tiny house dwelling. Everything from cancer patients that sold off all of their stuff to pay medical bills and living in a tiny house behind a friend's house, you know? I mean, it's just our movement, I like to, you know, pretend that I am part of the movement. So our movement has just so many implications for so many people. It's almost like sometimes I'm like, why aren't you a part of it? Why aren't you part? You don't care about, you're like, it's so like, why is it so hard for you to believe that somebody doesn't need 3,000 square feet to be successful? Why is that? Why are you thinking they're crazy? Or that, why don't they just move into a mobile home park? Like, those are not one and the same. They could be one and the same. It doesn't have to be one and the same. And so I think that's why we're so passionate about it, is that there's no end in sight to the benefit that it can have for